Ellie's Story, Chapter 5. I knew Jacob had been happy that I'd gone in the water. I was glad he was pleased, but I was also very relieved when we went back to our old park the next day. I liked Find a lot better than Swim. Wally wasn't around. I was used to that by now. I looked up at Jacob, my ears alert for Find, but Jacob did something new. He had carried an old coat with him from the chuck, and now he held it out to me. Find, Ellie, find! Find the coat? That was strange. The coat was right there over Jacob's arm. Jacob moved the coat closer to me so that I could smell it. I breathed in the aromas of the person who'd been wearing it. It wasn't Wally. The coat smelled of someone else, another man. My nose picked up sweat, something sweet that spilled, coffee, smoke from those strange white sticks people like to put in their mouths. Find, Ellie. I was still confused, but I sniffed around a little on the grass. Find usually started with smelling, and there it was, the same smell that was on the coat. I remembered how I often found Wally's socks or his t-shirts and showed them to Jacob. This seemed to be the same sort of thing, except I was not supposed to find this coat and bring it to Jacob. I was supposed to find the person who had worn the coat. Now I knew what to do. It was easy. The trail was fresh and strong, and it wasn't hard to follow it along the grass, between two benches, under the grass. And there he was, a man in a yellow sweater and a brown hat, with one of those white sticks in his mouth. When I ran back for Jacob, he knew right away that I had something to show, and he followed me to where the man was still waiting. The man got up and shook Jacob's hand, and I heard Jacob thanking him after I got a good game of tug on a stick. The next day was even stranger. Jacob and I went back to the park, and he did nothing but look down at me. Find, he said. I sniffed. No smell of the man with the coat. No smell of Wally. I looked up at Jacob. What did he want me to do? He was watching me intently. Find, he repeated. Find, Ellie. I went back to sniffing the ground, hoping that would give me more clues. There were a lot of interesting smells. The grass itself, the dirt beneath, places here and there where other dogs had peed, some popcorn that had been dropped, a trail where a raccoon had wandered past in the night, another where a rabbit had hopped by a few hours ago. Feet had crisscrossed this area, and so had paws. I sniffed harder. Sometimes I need you to look for any people you can, Ellie, Jacob said. I looked at his face when I heard my name. Okay, find. At the command, I lowered my nose. There was one smell that was fresh and stood out. Female. Human. Not too old. I followed the trail a few feet. She wore rubber shoes. She'd eaten something with cream cheese for breakfast. She'd gone this way. I looked back at Jacob to see if he'd tell me I was doing this wrong. He stood still as I moved away from him, watching me with that look he only got when we were working, as if I were the only thing in the world he could see. I put my nose back to the ground, not quite sure if this was the right thing to do. Still, Jacob had told me to find. The easiest way to find around here was the track of the girl who had eaten cream cheese. I started to follow her. Her trail led me to a bench. I stopped and sniffed hard. She sat here for a little while. I could smell her shoes and her clothes, her skin and her hair, but she wasn't here now, so Find was not over yet. I followed the girl's trail away from the bench across the lawn with soft grass. Some young humans were throwing a ball there and shouting. I moved quickly across the soft grass, and a red ball rolled right in front of my nose. It would have been so easy to pick it up and run back with it to the boy who had thrown it. Jacob wasn't here to see me do it, and it would only be a minute or two of play. The ball was right there, just inches from my nose. But what about the girl? I was supposed to find her. Jacob had said so. I couldn't stop and play now. There wasn't time for that. This was work. Play came later. The girl's trail led me across a muddy path, and then it started to wind around the roots of trees. I jumped across a thick root that twisted like a snake, and there she was, sitting under a tree with a book in her lap. She looked up at me and smiled, and then looked down and turned a page. I ran to find Jacob dashing back across the lawn, running right through the game of catch, feeling a little worried. Was this right? Was this what he wanted me to do? It seemed to be. "Show me," he said as soon as I reached him, and "Good dog" when I brought him to the girl. "Good dog, Ellie." "What are you doing?" asked the girl, putting her book down on her lap and staring at us. "She's a search and rescue dog," Jacob explained. "She's training to find people." The girl smiled widely. "She found me?" "That she did." Jacob found a stick for me, and we played around the little clearing. The girl didn't seem to know that it was her job to play tug on a stick. Wally always knew. But I didn't care too much as long as someone was willing to pull and wrestle with me. Maybe the girl wasn't all that bright, but she was still nice. She laughed and put out her hand when I came near, and I hoped she might have some cream cheese to share. She didn't have any, but she scratched behind my ears. That was nice, too. I didn't like the next person I found quite as much. He was crouched in a bush with a pair of big, strange-looking glasses held to his eyes. He smelled sour, as if he hadn't had a good bath in a while. Someone needed to spray him with a hose. "Shoo!" he hissed at me when I found him the first time. And when I brought Jacob to him, he stood up and frowned as Jacob called me a good dog and let me tug him all around the bush with my stick. "Do you mind playing with your dog somewhere else?" the man asked grumpily. "You scared off a scarlet tanager." "Sorry, sir," Jacob said. "I didn't know what was being said." But the man seemed unhappy, and Jacob didn't seem too concerned about it. We found a lot of people in the days after that. Some were glad to see us, some were not. But Jacob always told me I was a good dog no matter how the person I found acted. This was what work meant, I decided. I was supposed to find people and take Jacob to them so that he could decide whether they were the right people or not. That was his job. Finding them was mine. I had been with Jacob about a year when he started taking me to a new place to work. This place had a lot of people in it, most of them dressed like Jacob. They were friendly and called me by name, but they drew back respectfully when Jacob told me to heel. There were also some other dogs in this workplace. Jacob took me out back to a fenced-in pen. "Here's your kennel, girl," he said. Two other dogs were inside already, Cammy and Gypsy. Cammy was jet black and Gypsy was brown. I stood still and let them sniff me all over when Jacob opened the door and let me inside. Then it was my turn to sniff them. They smelled all right. Gypsy was about my age. Cammy was older. After he'd inspected me, Cammy settled down on the ground with a sigh as if he didn't find a new dog all that interesting. Gypsy, though, had a fuzzy green ball in her mouth. She put it on the ground and let it roll a few inches away, and then she snatched it up again. She looked at me. A ball. A ball was something I could play with. Why should Gypsy have the ball and not me? I didn't let on how much I'd like to have a ball, too. But the next time Gypsy allowed the ball to roll away, I pounced. She raced me to it, but she wasn't fast enough. I had it now. Gypsy chased me around the kennel, and Cammy groaned a little when we tore right past his nose. Then I let Gypsy have the ball again, and it was her turn to chase me. But when Jacob came out into the yard, I quickly dropped the ball and went to sit by the fence to watch him. Gypsy snatched the ball up, but she came over too. Even Cammy sat up, and his ears were alert. Was it time to work? It didn't seem to be. Jacob just looked at me and nodded. "Getting on all right?" he asked, and then he scratched my ears through the wire fence before he left again. That was how it was in the kennel. When Gypsy and I had time, we played while Cammy watched. But if a person walked into the yard, our games were over. We dashed to the fence, ready if the call to work came. Gypsy worked with a police officer named Paul, and they were gone a lot, but sometimes I saw them work in the yard. They did it all wrong. Gypsy just poked her nose in between boxes and into piles of clothing, even when it was obvious there wasn't a person hidden there. Worse, she'd alert Paul when hadn't found anyone. But he always called her a good dog anyway and pulled a little package out from where her nose had been pointed. Cammy didn't bother to watch Gypsy. Probably he felt embarrassed for the poor dog. Cammy's person was named Amy, and they didn't go out much. When they did, though, they went fast. Amy would come and get Cammy, and they'd leave at a run. I didn't really understand what either of them was doing, but I knew it couldn't be as important as find. "Where are you working this week?" Amy asked Paul once. Looking for drug smugglers out at the airport again until Garcia comes off sick leave, Paul told her. How's life on the bomb squad? Quiet. I'm worried about Cammy, though. His scores have been a little off. I'm wondering if his nose is going. At the sound of his name, Cammy raised his head and I looked over at him. He's what, 10 years old now, Paul asked. About that, Amy answered. I stood up and shook myself because I could sense Jacob coming. A few seconds later, he walked around the corner. He and the other officers stood and talked while we dogs watched them, wondering why they didn't let us out in the yard to be with them. Suddenly, I felt a surge of excitement off Jacob. He spoke to his shoulder in that same funny way humans sometimes held up boxes near their faces and talked into them. 10-4, Unit 8, Kilo 6 responding, he said. Amy ran over to our gate. Cammy jumped up, but Amy didn't call for him. She was looking at me. Ellie? Amy commanded, come. Jacob was running, and as I streaked past, Amy chasing him. In moments, he was out of the yard, and I was in the cage in the back of the truck. I found myself panting, picking up some of Jacob's excitement. Something told me that whatever was happening, it was far more important than find Wally.